Alright, so today we're going to do a more complicated roof and wall build than the first few tutorials. We're going to do a natural log cabin, but this style will work for different types of blocks like adobe and brick as well if you use different roof and wall types. So to add a little bit of interesting effect to this as well, we're going to have this raised by one block. So the first thing we want to do is set out the borders of where the ground is going to be. And so we're going to do 10 across by 12, and we won't need to keep all of these pillars here. We just want to make sure that all four sides are going to connect. So we'll go all the way around. You can also, at this point, I recommend if you want to make sure you've got an even space on both sides of your doorway, now's a good time to just place down any doors or windows if they're multi-block size, just so you know that you're going to have an even edge on either side. So I want this to be open, and we're going to use a stone plaza mat. So just like the first side, just go 12 down, and then we're going to go back and delete them all. If you have your build binoculars, obviously it's going to be a little bit quicker to do stuff like this. I am trying to do it as a mix of both. I'll do a little bit of building without the build binoculars so that if you don't have them yet, you can follow along a little bit easier, and then I'll show a little bit of the build binoculars as well. I recommend, if you want to do a lot of building, to focus on getting all your tablet targets done so that you can get them. This only took me about 20-25 minutes to build. It will probably take you a good 20 minutes longer if you don't have the build binoculars. So now that we've got the 4 points of the hut set out, we can go around and do a nice base block for effect. The great thing with these infinity tiling blocks is that it makes a nice little effect on the corners where they sort of stick out on the edges. So we'll go along. If you don't have your build binoculars, you're just holding your look up button to do them all the way across. And then now that that's done, I recommend filling in the floor now. That way you're not going to be struggling of falling in or out. That's also why I have my saber cub here, because I do want to be able to quickly jump up on the roofs, or if I get stuck in the floor, jump out without having to build supports. There's nothing wrong with having to build supports and then get rid of them, but I've found that with a saber cub or a scare cub, you can kind of have a little bit easier time just jumping up and down instead of putting pillars everywhere. So now we're going to go ahead and start putting in some of the wall supports. Now, these corner tiling blocks, unfortunately, you can't just place another block straight on them. So to get around that, we were just connecting a block in from the corner in an L shape, and then we went and deleted them. You won't have that problem, as you can see, though, just with the normal infinity pieces, only the corner pieces. So once we've done that, we can also go around, and here I've actually decided, just for a little bit more of an interesting effect at the front, we're going to have those pillars cutting through where that barrier is at the bottom. So now I suggest next thing is to build your four corner supports. If you don't have your build binoculars, I think the easiest way is to go around one at a time and go from the bottom, because then when you've done your last support, you're going to be on the roof already to start building around. Otherwise, if you've got your build binoculars, it's always nice. You can just stand in the middle and we'll be able to go through and just quickly build everything up. So once we're on top, again, this is a good use of the saber cub because it takes a bit of practice, but once you're used to it, it's easy to just land on a single block. And we'll go around now and put in our support so that we can put our first layer of roof. So you could do this as the infinite log, but you then have to play around with the corners, and because you're not actually going to see this block really at all, as long as it's kind of matching a little bit in colour so it doesn't stand out from the inside, it's not something you'll notice. So I say go around, probably don't use a log block, go around and use a different type of easy to break block. So now that we've done that, we can start doing the roof. So this is going to be a little bit more of a complex roof because we're going to do what I believe is called a Dutch gabled roof. So it's going to be partially a wraparound roof. We're going to do one level now that's all wrapping around, and we're going to have a gable in the middle. So that's the sort of pointy triangle shaped roof parts. It isn't hard to do, it's just that if you don't connect the pieces correctly, it looks a little blocky. So we can already see it's coming together pretty nicely. Next thing we want to do is just go around and put a second layer on. You may have to vary how many layers you do depending on how big or small the rooms are, but if you practice with this room, you'll get a bit better an idea. I suggest probably not making the gabled section more than 6 to 8 blocks wide. Again, depending how big or small it is, it may be different. You'll need to do more than one layer to get the effect that we're looking for at the end, where it's kind of got a nice curved conical shape, but probably no more than 4, because it's going to start looking a little oversized at that point. And remember, you can always use your snapshot camera to have a look around without jumping off the roof, and it gives you a better idea of what you're building. So once we've done that layer, we're going to do another border layer of blocks. Again, just make sure they match the general style of the building. They don't need to be anything in particular. You can kind of use spare blocks as long as they are similar. Sometimes I do. So once we have done the second layer, we're going to do a third layer, but we're not going to go all the way around this time. We're going to pick 2 sides. And generally you're going to want those 2 sides to be the sides that you won't see, because you want the nice pointed part of the gable facing towards the front of the door. Usually, but you can play around with placing it on a different angle. So once we've done that, we're then going to go ahead and do another border layer, but just like the roof itself, we're not going to go all the way around. You may need to just pop in an extra block on either side because it won't attach directly to the roof. And then once we've done that, we're going to do another layer of a roof on both sides. So you'll be able to see now already that it's sort of coming together with the shape a little bit better, and it gives you an idea of why I said you want to have a few layers of the wraparound before you start this gable. So to connect it, we just need to, one more time, go ahead and do another layer and another layer of roofing on top of it. So now we've got our final layer left. We could just use the normal roof blocks and go along. It can be a little frustrating doing that because the infinity system kind of connects weirdly. Sometimes you have to place them individually, but I would actually prefer to do something a little bit different here with our fancy roof. So we're going to use the roof windows as the 2 top layers. This gives it a little bit of an extra effect on top of the roof, just a little bit extra decoration, plus you don't have to worry about sitting there and individually placing each roof tile to make sure that they don't accidentally connect in a way you don't want. So that's starting to look like quite a nice little Dutch gable. So it's a wraparound with a gable top, and we'll just go through a few different ways that we can play with the gabled area and make it decorative. So if we fill in the sides, I won't do it in this build, but you can put sconces or different types of lights just inside behind this little windowed area to give a nice glow effect coming through the roof. And you can use a few different types of decoration for that space. You could just put in windows, glass windows, but you could also put in wooden brackets, which I'll show you what that looks like. You could also put in different types of lattice. You could have like flowers or decorations. You could make it look like it was like a crawl space from the outside. This gives it maybe like a little bit more of a barny feel, I always feel like, when you're using the wooden brackets. But I also really like using the netting for lots of different stuff, like the walls, being able to play around with different designs for windows and things, and we can use this netting as well on the bottom to kind of have a flow-on effect through the design. We want to use a bunch of different materials, but we also want to kind of use some of the same materials repetitively in different sections so that it feels continuous. Alright, so if we have a look now, that is pretty much the roof done. We can play around a little bit more with it, but the netting, because you can see through it, especially if you put lights in the top, that's going to give a really nice effect. Plus when you're looking around, you can kind of see through to the other side. So another thing that we can do here is just add another wraparound to the roof once we've gotten it to that point. If you, like I said, if you go up too many before you start, you may end up with a roof that's too large for the structure. So I went with 2 initially, but I can kind of make it into 3 just by adding that one on the side, and you still have the same effect, but it also looks slightly different. So you can use those 2 different things for different effects. Another thing you could do here is have a wraparound, but in the middle do some sort of like window design as well. So I won't even the roof up now, just to give you an idea of the different styles though. You could do, I mean, you could always do a mix anyway, but I tend to like my roofs kind of even front and back, but that's probably more a personal preference. So what I'm going to do is go around and add the netting underneath the structure. It's not necessarily necessary, but like I said, with the netting on the top, I feel like if you use the same materials in a few different locations in your build, it gives a little bit more continuity. So obviously there are glass windows that can be used, and they look great in a lot of different types of structures, even these log builds. But I do like to use different sort of lattice effects for these log builds a lot of the time. I just think it gives it a little bit more of an open area effect like you'd want from these cabins. So I like the wooden fencing, especially for lattice sections like this. And they won't connect to the log blocks on either side, but they will connect to each other. So I think that is nice and even, and also has a lot of different texture at the front, so it already looks quite interesting. Now we'll go through a few different styles of things you can do for the sides. One thing you could do is just go straight across pretty much the whole way and do like little, to me this almost reminds me of like a wilderness, like a viewing platform. So doing long logs along the side and then leaving like a thin gap, and you could put some latticing in it or just leave it open. I think if you do it like this, just with one log on top, it's almost like a little wilderness viewing platform. Once we go down like this, we can put lattice in there. That could even be a feature wall from the outside where you could have, you know, leaves and things, or maybe even like a little garden section. And so that is one wall, but another way we could do it is using the vertical logs. So going along like this, if we get our, you could use ropey logs all the way up, but I think it gets a bit too much in terms of texture. I usually only do one row and then a couple plain. So if we go through and do a few here, we could do one big window, or we could do a few small windows, and that's still going to give it a nice sort of textured feel. And again, I like leaving these windows open, but if you had them as glass, that would still fit in as well. And here we'll just see what it looks like instead doing the netting. Sometimes it's good to just practice on different walls to see which one of these things is going to look the best for what you want in the end, and then go around and just change the other walls to fit the style. So obviously we could just do the back wall however we like, but as a little bonus, let's just make it a little bit more interesting again, and we'll put a balcony out here. So if we go along and do one up, to do that again with these corner blocks, they can be a bit annoying. You'll have to put one on the ground, but once you have, you can just go around and do a nice border. Once that's done, I suggest putting some blocks underneath, like at your front, just so it doesn't look like it's floating. And for this one, I think what we want to do is actually do the roof one lower than the roof in the cabin. That way, it just adds a little bit of variation. There'd be nothing wrong with doing the roof from the same height, but I probably wouldn't recommend trying to do more of the wooden roofing because that might end up being a little much. So I think for this we'll use flat roofing. And so like when we've done the other floor, best thing to do once we've done this barrier is to just go around and fill it in. I've decided I'm going to use bark because it's a natural colour and it suits, but it's a little bit different textured as well. So we'll go along and like I said, we'll just leave it one less than what the actual original roof was. And then we'll go around and do our border as well. You can play around with different heights, but I think that one down like this for this particular size build is probably the best to go with. So we could use our wooden roofing, it would definitely suit in the build, but just to show that we can do some different types of blocks to fit in with the wooden roof, we'll try something different. So once we've done a section around, and here I am going to use the blocks as the actual border, the log blocks, because I want to have that interesting effect on the corners, and we're not going to be attaching roofs to the side. So there's a few different things you could try, like the wooden grating, but the basic bridge is actually a really good one. It could be quite hard to line up, but once you do, as you can see, it's a quite nice effect. It's a little bit lighter than the rest of the build, but it definitely suits in. And so this is pretty much done at this point. You could definitely play around with different roof types for the actual balcony, but I think this is a nice effect. And one last thing we can do is add a nice little border to our balcony. Obviously there's plenty of stuff like the wooden fence which you can use, and because we've already used that in the build again, it would help with continuity, so it's a good idea. But there are some other types of, I guess, railings that you can make yourself. So if you go around and put some netting and a block, obviously that doesn't look good, but if you have your chisel, it actually is a quite nice effect to do something like the netting or the lattice, or even just as a block on top of the wooden railings, to chisel down a half block of something like a wood or a brick, and then you have a nice railing effect, and you can fill in the sides however you want. I'm going to go ahead and just put a couple of long blocks in to add a nice final effect. So that's it. So simple log cabin with a Dutch gabled roof. And I recommend playing around with little bits of these styles, recreate this yourself, and it helps you kind of just learn how things connect and how they're going to look. And if you make anything cool from this stuff, please let me know. And if there's anything you want to see, also, please just let me know. All right, guys, thanks.